one. And there we go, we're live. Some of the people who are in the waiting room are already joining us. So, welcome everybody. We are going to give a minute for the other folks to join us. But while they're doing that, if you'd like to drop in the chat where you're speaking from and your name, we'll be chatting all throughout the lesson. And I'll warm us up because I'm in a different place. I'm in São Paulo, Brazil. What about you, Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I'm in Austin, Texas, for those of you who I don't know.
Perfect. And what's up, Delphina, New York City? Let's go, Sarah, Wilmington, North Carolina. Sick. All right. Well, we like to be pretty timely with these. I see some folks are also still joining us, but I think we can just get started and everybody gets the recording afterwards as well, so nobody should miss anything. As always, thank you guys all for coming and joining us here for another micro lesson. My name is Rick Barcelos. I am the community manager here at Growth. And joining me today, we have our COO, Nick Cull. Really excited to be doing your first lesson here, Nick, with us. It's going to be a really, really exciting one. You guys are not here to hear from me. You're here to hear from Nick. So, Nick, please go ahead and take it from here.
Yeah, appreciate it, Rick. Hello, everyone. Thanks again for making some time. So today we're going to be talking about the right way to implement HubSpot. And just to kind of get us started here, this is the direction we're headed in. So we're going to explore why so many implementations miss the mark, what goes wrong, what it costs, how to avoid that kind of same fate. Then we're going to walk through what successful outcome-driven implementations look like, as well as some examples to help bring it to life. And then we're going to wrap up with some takeaways you guys can start to act on immediately. So just a quick welcome, what to expect, who I am. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Nick Cull. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Growth. I came to Growth after spending the past 7 years at HubSpot. Throughout my time both at Growth and at HubSpot, I've been a part of over 800 implementations, both from the pre-sale side as well as in the post-sale and the execution side. I now work at Growth as an elite HubSpot partner. We have 2 accreditations. And I want to just kind of set the foundations here that this session isn't going to be about setup checklists. This is really about how a strategic implementation becomes your secret weapon and helping you to align your teams, helping you to scale faster. So what better place to start than with the current state of implementation? And I'm going to go pretty fast. We got a lot of content here. Everything that you see is designed to be screenshotted. So, please, by all means, take some screenshots, take notes, drop some questions in the chat. But this might be the most important slide in the entire deck. More than 70% of CRM projects don't meet their objectives, and that's not necessarily because of bad software, but more so because of poor planning, rushed rollouts, or failure to get people to do and use the tools as they were designed for. And almost every project I've been a part of has started off with someone saying something to the effect of, we had a really bad implementation of Salesforce or Zoho or Dynamics, Marketing Cloud, Marketo. So I wanted to really point out here that the things that we do in the first 90 days of these projects determine whether or not HubSpot's going to stay as the system that we're using in our organization or be replaced. 50% of the customer's loyalty is shaped not necessarily by the product that they bought. There's a lot of feature parity. HubSpot can do a lot of the same things that other tools can do. It's really shaped by the experience they have after you sign on with HubSpot. So that really means that implementation isn't a technical process. Rather, it's a growth critical, revenue protecting, trust building moment. And when we get it wrong, for the sales reps that are on this call and CSMs, that means clawbacks. For our customers and prospective customers, that means revenue and time lost. And for the other partners that are joining us here today, that's reputational damage. So when we get it right, it becomes a launch pad for long-term value and for both the customer and for the partner that's involved and for HubSpot as a business. It's a really symbiotic process. But that really shapes why we're here today, is to talk not about how to implement faster, but how to implement smarter. So I'm going to start this off with, and a lot of you may know this, if you've been on a call with me before, you may have heard the answer to this question before, so try not to spoil it. But what are the 4 most dangerous words you can hear in an implementation? Cheap. Don't want to hear that either. All we need is four very, very dangerous words. Why is it dangerous? It signals oversimplification of a complex problem. When someone says all we need is a basic lead form, they're often unaware of the downstream implications that can impact your scoring, your routing, your lifecycle stages, notifications, workflows. Really, what it sounds like is, oh, this is a simple request. What it means is maybe we haven't thought through this process yet. Another one that we often kind of attach to this is it's a defense mechanism for a lack of clarity. So the prospects or clients that I've worked with, they sometimes feel unsure about what they need, right? I don't know what I don't know. And they try to minimize the scope of sounding underprepared or getting overwhelmed. And instead of saying, we're not really sure how this would work, they'll say, all we need is one workflow, because that's what seems tangible. And it also sets the stage for downstream scope creep. What starts as a simple form or pipeline creation, for example, can balloon into a deeper ask. And once the system goes live, because the real business leads weren't surfaced up front, all we need is one dashboard becomes lifecycle stage reporting by persona, channel across 3 different business units. It's a really complicated task. And lastly, it undermines the value of strategic discovery. And this phrase can put pressure on sales reps or partners or other members of your team that are a part of the evaluation into just building the thing. Instead, you're skipping the critical discovery phase where the real needs and the risks are uncovered. It's the slippery slope that comes from solving quickly to evolve to become solving wrong. So to keep us moving here, what are the most common implementation mistakes, and importantly, what do they cost? One of the biggest ones that we see here is no measurement plans. And it's really a component of failing to define what success looks like before you go live. Too often teams are launched into setup without a clear measurement plan, and they're busy just configuring the tool or training the user, moving fast, trying to get value quickly. And that's where the trouble starts. Because even if the system is technically sound, you can't prove value to leadership, and it won't matter, frankly, without visible outcomes. The entire project starts to become labeled as a sunk cost. The optics are brutal, budget shrinks, user licenses start to go unused, and suddenly HubSpot becomes that expensive tool that we tried and it never really started to work out. And here's the kicker, you really get one shot of this. If you miss the window early on, it's incredibly hard to recover that momentum, right? As I mentioned earlier on, that 90-day period is super, super important for proving that the implementation worked. And that plays really nicely with this concept of technical over business outcomes. Executives want business results. They don't want a tour of fields or forms or workflows. If you've tied the build to what they care about, things like revenue, cost, or speed, they'll start to pay attention. If you don't, they're going to disengage and they're not going to advocate for the platform anymore. So if you start to make this a technology initiative as opposed to a business initiative, it's going to lose sight very quickly and it just becomes another tool in your tech stack. How do we get ahead of this? And where does this system or this issue stem from? It's a lack of discovery. Many implementations launch with just the default object setup and generic pipelines, kind of walking through that template of here's what you check to set up HubSpot. And they may sound helpful at first, but it doesn't match how the business actually operates. Without intentional discovery, you're really risking the system starting to develop and feel like it's someone else's, or just feel like it's too generic to fit your needs. And this is another example. I'm sure a lot of you are tired of hearing this, but without change management, none of this is going to work. And an expression I use all the time is I used to suck at golf, then I got a new set of golf clubs, and then I realized I still suck at golf. You can't just lift and shift the same processes and put them into a system and assume that it's going to solve all your problems. HubSpot's not a silver bullet. Yes, it is a great tool. I love it, but it doesn't solve your problems just by moving into a new system inherently. You have to have some real change. So great screenshot slide for you all here. Just a quick summary of some of the things that we just talked through. So I'll give you all a minute to take that. And now we're going to pivot into the right way to implement HubSpot. So this is kind of addressing all the issues that we just discussed. And I think that really is staked in discovery-driven design is how we define it here at Growth. Most implementations go wrong before they start because they're built around platform needs, right? Not the business goals. With discovery-driven design, it kind of flips the script by starting with the outcomes and then designing backwards from there. I've always said that the business initiatives should shape the technology and not the other way around. And our most successful clients don't start with what they want HubSpot to do. Rather, they start with what they want the business to achieve, and then we turn that into system design. So, for example, instead of saying we need lead scoring, ask what would reps do to call the right person, and how would we measure whether or not that's working? Another concept here that really applies to this same theme is systems that sell. So it's really important that when we're taking this into consideration, we're proactively iterating and we're reacting quickly. If you have new salespeople coming in or a drop in activities, reporting gaps, all of these processes starting to take place outside of HubSpot that maybe had a home inside of HubSpot, it's time to connect with your team, start to adjust quickly, and do it with agility in a way that you only can inside of HubSpot, and then you live happily ever after from then on. This is the important balancing act between leadership's requirements and end users' functionality, right? If leadership has too many strict policies about required fields and updates and all these things that need to happen in order to power reporting, the tool becomes clunky. No one wants to use it, and it starts to feel too restrictive to the reps process. On the other side of that spectrum, if we let all the reps go in and they go wild west and start adding properties and uploading data and not logging calls, it all of a sudden just becomes a giant repository of useless information with no context. It's all about finding that delicate balance between the right amount of responsibility and requirements and the right amount of freedom and usability for your team. And importantly, we also have to prove that it works, right? This is where ROI comes from. And you really have to be able to tell a story with the data. And just having a dashboard that shows how many calls your reps made or how many people clicked on an email isn't enough. The activity data needs to tell a story of how many of these calls lead to a deal being created, or how many calls did it take to close that deal, how many people followed the link in the email, hit the landing page, submitted the form, booked a meeting, and then purchased the product. All of this to say your data has to tell a story. You can't just rely on a default dashboard to come in and prove value. It's more than that. You have to show the impact fast. And this is the kind of stuff that keeps leadership engaged. It helps to unlock future investment potential as well, and turns your implementation into a growth story. Now, in terms of process enablement, this is just a fancy way of saying training. You have to make sure that when you're going through training for your team, you don't just jam them into HubSpot Academy and assume that that is sufficient in getting them up and running. You need to make sure that they're trained on your systems and your processes, not just on HubSpot as a tool. Having a generic training flow is helpful if someone has never used HubSpot, but if that person's never used HubSpot, you can't expect them to go and understand how to use your HubSpot. So another summary slide here, give everyone a minute to take a screenshot before we move on. And then we're going to pivot into some real examples of how this starts to materialize in client work. So these are some fictitious examples that I've designed to help give us an understanding of a near miss and some other scenarios. Really, implementation is where the project is either going to succeed or fail, not just technically, but also commercially. There's no ROI without adoption. And in the case of Initech, this is a team that had good intentions, right? They had a decent product and maybe just a slightly rushed implementation. When they said, all we need is lead capture forms and a pipeline, their team should have paused, but instead they got what they asked for, not what they actually needed. There was no structured discovery, no clarity on how deals were actually going to be worked, and no plan for how we were going to measure impact. The result, we had low adoption. The reps didn't trust the data. Leadership couldn't see any ROI. And then 6 months later, the CRM was back on the table. What are we going to do to replace HubSpot? Because that implementation just didn't work. This is why we don't skip discovery, because while even technically correct setup can fail the business, it's going to fail if it is not aligned to the real world needs. So that's the tale of Initech. We're going to talk a little bit about Swift now. This was the near miss and the story of a project that has no real ending. So Swift Health had a good team that got most of the things right, but they missed a really critical step. They had a strong internal champion for HubSpot, and the implementation was tidy, and all of their automations worked and the data even looked clean. But here's the thing, they They scoped the project around tools as opposed to incomes. And when leadership asked, what is the impact that this has made on our pipeline? No one could answer. Now, that's really highlighting the risk of skipping outcome based alignment. No matter how clean the build is, if you can't tell the story of improvement, faster time to close, or clearer attribution, or more engaged leads, you start to lose momentum. And it wasn't a failed project, it just wasn't a scalable success either. And lastly, we have the standout. This is Horizon Analytics, the project that helped to define the playbook. So when we look at Horizon, this is a team that got absolutely everything right. They didn't start with features, they started with their goals. What does success look like in 30 and 60, 90 days? Where do leads get stuck? What reports does the CEO expect to see on their desk every week? And every part of the implementation was mapped to those outcomes. Every workflow supported a team's process. Dashboards were ready before the go live date, and users were logging in. And because of that, they saw immediate value, right? No one cares about having all of the properties configured and having all of the tools turned on in HubSpot unless those things align to what business outcomes they're trying to drive. What the result looked like for them was faster deal velocity. They had more marketing source revenue. And the best part, every department adopted the system because it worked for the way that they work. And this is what happens when strategy leads the build. The system doesn't work, it works for them. So that's really the impact that we're looking to drive here, is to have a system that is more than just a tool. So I wanted to take some time just to kind of recap and go through what are some of the main learning objectives from today's conversation. And we're going to do that in the form of just a quick Q&A. So true or false, biggest risk to a HubSpot project is having the wrong tools. False. The biggest risk is misalignment. You can have the wrong tools, and yeah, that's going to hurt, but your project is predestined to fail if you don't start with good discovery and you aren't aligned to those business outcomes. We're going to move on to the next one. True or false, most users fail to adopt HubSpot because it's too complex. False. Everyone should have got this one right. As we know, HubSpot hangs their hat on being the system that is easy to use. Most users, they don't fail to adopt it because it's hard. They fail and choose to fail because it doesn't work for their workflow. Without context-driven training, it's just not going to be relevant to them and it's not going to be valuable. Last one for you guys. Setting up dashboards is enough to measure the success of HubSpot. Falsito, Chaban. Exactly right. Your data needs to tell a story, right? Just having a default dashboard from HubSpot isn't a sophisticated solution. It's not a relevant solution. And it doesn't get into the point of how are we going to have the story told of why HubSpot was a success, why we made this investment, why we need to keep it, and why I deserve a promotion for implementing the best tool that the business has ever had. So that's all I have for you guys today. I wanted to keep things brief and leave some time for questions. Just as a quick CTA before we get into the Q&A, this content was designed to be for current and prospective HubSpot users, as well as HubSpotters and other partners in the ecosystem. We've got a couple different CTAs for you, depending on which group you fall within. So feel free to take action on this. We'll send you guys some recordings after this, as well as a link to the presentation. And we'll use the remaining time for any questions you guys may have.
That's right. Thank you, Nick. Really, really incredible presentation, and congrats to everybody here. You guys are spot on the answers for pretty much the most part on that little short Q&A. But like Nick said, this is the time that we traditionally leave the floor open if anybody would like to ask questions. We do have a couple questions that were sent in ahead by folks that are not able to be here today, Nick. But please do drop your questions in the chat. We'll make sure to prioritize you guys that are here. But maybe to get things started, give you guys a little bit of time to think, we can start with one of them. And this was sent in by, let me make sure that I get this name right, Kathy. And Kathy asked, can you compare HubSpot to Monday.com? And I think she's probably talking in the perspective of implementing these tools on your business.
Yeah, I would electively choose to implement one, and the other one I would not. I'm clearly a biased resource on this perspective, though, but it really depends on the business. Some businesses would be a great fit for Monday.com, especially on the smaller side of SMB. It is a totally practical and efficient tool for small and scaling businesses. And as a result, the process that you would take for implementing HubSpot for a group of 5 people, very different from implementing it in contrast to HubSpot in a group of 50. There's a lot more to unpack on that. Kathy, if you're watching this recording and want to have a more tailored conversation about that, I'm happy to. But just know I have a bias towards HubSpot.
Awesome. And then Heather's asked, do you offer a proven or helpful list of discovery questions?
Yeah, I love that question. I think that there are some general best practices, and I think that when I think about discovery, it's always about the questions that tie back to the business. So, what are the business outcomes? What does success look like after this period of time? What are the things that are going to make you say that I'm glad that I implemented this tool? Those work for every customer of every size and every industry. Beyond that, the more tailored your discovery is and the more nomenclature you can use that's specific to that industry, the better it's going to be. But as long as your questions are tailored to the client or the customer's goal, you're going to be coming across like a rock star.
And then Chris said, great info, but what if we have a deal in flight and we're getting close to closing the deal? Is it possible to stop before we close or do we fix it later?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say if you don't fix it now, you're going to be setting yourself up for problems later. If you're a sales rep and you don't address this up front, it means that you're going to be spending time in your inbox triaging these requests because the context wasn't set up properly up front and there were misset or not necessarily misset expectations but misaligned, and you'll end up doubling the amount of time and effort that it will take to solve for these things post sale. And if you're a customer or a prospective customer, yes, absolutely, if you're in the process of evaluating HubSpot, take the time, pause, reflect, really ask what these things will mean for your business so that you have a better chance of getting this done the right way. No one wants to be the one that championed for HubSpot, had it implemented, and then have it fail and have that be a black mark on your record. So, all of that to say, the more that you do this proactively, the better it will be. And the stronger the consultative authority you will have in these conversations. Um, it really shows that you care about what the impact is as opposed to just setting up the tools.
Now let's go for Sarah. Sarah's asking for ROI on the marketing side. Are there any tips for showing HubSpot's value?
Yeah, I love this question because I think for as long as marketing as a practice has existed, marketing has always had to fight for a seat at the revenue table, right? How do we show that the things that we're spending money on actually have impact? There are great reporting mechanisms inside of HubSpot, like customer journey analytics, that help to tell that story. And regardless of what level or licensing that you have from HubSpot, whether it's professional or enterprise or starter, there is some version of reporting in there that you can use to tell a story, and it's about aligning it to the customer journey. So the more that you can show the progress of someone taking an action, and whether that has a dollar and cents direct implication to it, I think that's kind of besides the point. If you can show a return on investment as a result of this customer taking this action and doing this thing, and that taking less time than it would have otherwise have taken you before, or providing more insight that is relevant and helpful in building your community and building your brand, these are also tangible things. But again, it comes down to how you tell a story with the data. All of the information you need is at your fingertips. You just have to craft the report and interpret, tell the story.
We do have a two-sided question here from Heather. So first, she's asking, does HubSpot offer qualifiers for each type of modules they offer, such as startup, pro, etc.?
So on the product and pricing page, there is a catalog that outlines what feature limitations and feature and functionality exist at each level. That's a really binary way of saying, yes, you can do this, and you will need this hub in order to do that. I think that in some ways that's helpful. It's also sometimes counterproductive because it also brings you back into the space of I'm selling you a technology solution that can do this thing. Um, Hub and tier, yes, that's important. But I think that as you start to craft the story around what the goals are, work with your HubSpot rep or your HubSpot team, your engineers. They will help to make the appropriate recommendation and tell the story about which hub is required or best suited based on the goals and requirements of the organization.
Yep. And I think that kind of touches on the second part of your question, Heather, which was, and what about indicators for succession as to when recommending a company shifts from starter to pro? Kind of in the same line, right? Like always better to work back from your goals.
Yeah, and that's not to say that there isn't like a monetary component to this as well. There are certain kind of thresholds that exist, let's say for contact tiers on the marketing side and seat numbers, both core seats and paid licenses for sales or service hub, for example, where it may make more sense to move into a certain level as opposed to the other. Those are the really binary things that HubSpot as a business can help you with. But as a person that is selling it, as a person that is using it, or a person that is implementing it, you should be focused more on what the impact is of making the decision to have that function as a portion of your strategy and craft the narrative around why it may be beneficial or necessary on that point.
Yep. And just really quickly, Beth said days and power of collecting data analytics combined with staff narratives after HubSpot integration makes showing ROI crazy easy. Big agree with you there, Beth.
Yeah, gone are the days of fighting really hard to prove ROI inside of HubSpot. Again, there are tools and reports that can help to craft that story. It's up to you to clean and collect the data and put it in a way that is helpful. But I think beyond that, there's also the story of ROI as it relates to rep time and activity and the cost of inactivity. What happens if we don't take this action? What happens if we continue allowing this to be a gap or continue allowing this to remain siloed? All of these things, they take real time, and all of us know, especially small business owners, the most valuable resource you have is time.
True, very true. And with that, I maybe give a little bit more time, maybe a minute or so. If anybody has any more questions, um, if you don't think of it now, but it comes back to you later, though, as Nick showed in his CTA slide, which you guys will all receive alongside the recording on Monday. There's other ways to get in touch with us, either through Slack, LinkedIn, or reaching out to Nick directly. And so again, anything comes back to mind, you're like, oh shoot, I didn't ask that during the Q&A, but came to me at 2 a.m. before I go to sleep. Well, there's always a way to get in touch with us. And so we'll be right here for whatever you guys need. I don't believe we have any more questions for the time being, though. Nick, any last things that you want to say to everybody before we close out?
No, I just want to thank everyone for making the time to join today's conversation. I hope you all were able to take at least one thing that was helpful from the content today. As Rick mentioned, if there's anything that we can do to be helpful to you at all, feel free to reach out. We are a help first organization. Whether you want a sounding board, perspective on something, or need help getting something unstuck, let us know. We're happy to help chat.
Yep. And real quick, Delphina asked, when is the next session? Whenever you guys would like to see one. Everybody will also receive a survey email. So if you want to fill out that survey with what type of information you're looking for, that's what we're here for. Like Nick said, we'll put together the lesson for you. So look out for it. You should be seeing more sessions from us coming soon. But for the time being, this is it for today. Once again, thank you all for coming here to another micro lesson. We really appreciate everybody joining with us, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Have a great week.
Thanks, y'all.